Hello, everybody. Glad to see you all here. Before we begin covering this article about Canon, I would like to give you a reminder that Makeship has extended the plushie campaign. So if you are interested in buying an incredibly awesome-looking Rags 2.0 plushie with Velcro removable courage bottle, we'll call it, then you have an extra option to do so. Every purchase helps me out a great deal. I'd appreciate you just giving it a look. In my official Rags Discord, access is guaranteed with Patreon or Subscribe subscription, I have a channel called Suggestions for Content, where people send articles and videos and things that they wish me to cover. And oftentimes, a lot of my Dogbytes stuff is covering articles that are sent to me, and this is among them. This one is called The Problem with Canon by Adrian Westenfeld. And I gave it a little look through, and I was not impressed. Now, I already know what the problem with Canon is, or at least what this person and like-minded individuals think that the problem of Canon is. I'll tell you now, so there's no surprise later. The people like this, who defend shows like Rings of Power, right? Star Wars, MCU. They think that the problem with Canon is that it is a hamstring on creativity. It hampers their ability to essentially do what they want to do. That is how they phrase the problem with Canon. The subtitle, Rings of Power and Star Trek Strange New Worlds did the impossible, adapting behemoth pieces of IP without pissing off fans, for the most part. Turns out, Star Wars and the MCU have much to learn. Instantly, I think we all know what the issue here is with this subtitle. The more that you liked Tolkien, the more that you were a fan of Tolkien, the more you cared about Tolkien, the more that you probably despised Rings of Power. Now, Rings of Power isn't bad because it goes against Tolkien's canonical universe, right? I am of the, school of thought that your adherence to source material is not necessarily good or bad. It is a neutral thing. It's the story itself and the quality of how that story is told that will determine the quality of your work. And throughout this, I have not seen Star Trek Strange New Worlds, so that part of the article I'm skipping, and I won't speak to it because I haven't seen it. I don't know about it. Rings of Power, though, I know quite a bit about because I've seen Rings of Power, and if you want to know my full thoughts, as well as the thoughts of myself, some friends, and some excellent guests that we've had, we covered the entire first season of Rings of Power, well, I guess the only season that exists as of this recording, on our podcast, Every Frame a Pause. Go there and watch those if you want to get our full thoughts on it, though that will take you a long time. Too long didn't watch? The show is shit. It's really bad. Terrible characters, nonsensical plot, confusing thematics. It's a really bad show. I would not recommend anybody waste your time with it. If you want to watch a character-driven, fantasy-themed TV show, then luckily for you, House of the Dragon exists, and it is very good, and I would highly recommend House of the Dragon in Rings of Power place. But indeed, Rings of Power did piss off many, many fans, even before the show released, with the way that they talked about what they wanted to focus on, what they wanted to have be the center of their creative vision. Adherence to lore and world building, and I guess just general good storytelling, was clearly not what was on their mind, and if it was, then I suppose that's even more sad, isn't it? It is the best of times and the worst of times to be a fan. Probably worst of times. For devotees of mega franchises like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there has never been a more massive glut of new content. Indeed, there's a great deal of content for Star Wars and the MCU. The problem is that it's pretty much all horrible. It's all terrible. Whether or not it is truly better to have no content while the old good things can rest upon their laurels, deservedly, or if it's better to constantly get a stream of bad things, but its content at all, which of those two things is better is probably going to be up to interpretation, though I don't think that adding new things that are always so low quality is a good thing. We are living through a golden age of interconnected storytelling as sequels and prequels explode across film, television, and literature faster than many of us can keep up. I think that can keep up with, but we are not living in a golden age. I think we're living in an age of what's an undesirable metal? Corium? Uranium? Though I'm not sure that this kind of cinematic universe interconnected has ever really existed like this before, so I don't know what I'd really compare this to. I certainly wouldn't compare it to more aurous metals. It's unprecedented, particularly with the MCU, this expansion of bringing all of these stories together into the same universe. Unfortunately, it is done extremely poorly. The stories are bad, and one of the reasons that the stories are bad is because it feels like everyone's trying to do their own thing without really thinking about the interconnected universe that it is supposed to be a part of. Similar to the DC Extended Universe, the Marvel Extended Universe only feels like it's that way in name. So much of these IPs toss out the things they don't like. They add things regardless of its impact on the rest of the world. They simply don't care about this, they don't care about that. It doesn't feel like it's really interconnected in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways when it is contrary to established facts. The interconnectedness, that's not a word I get to say every day, but its interconnectedness is one of its weakest points now, when it should have been one of its strongest points and one of its most appealing elements. Whether, if you take the MCU, for instance, why didn't Black Widow have the Avengers help her with the Red Room? How come you have Kang introducing it? You have the multiverse stuff. It's all madness. It's all absolute freaking madness. Let's get back to this article. Yet at the same time, these mega franchises are tormented by their most strident fans, melting down into paroxysms of toxicity through petitions, review bombing, and targeted harassment campaigns, among other odious tactics. Paroxysm is not a word that you really ever hear. It means a sudden attack or a violent expression of emotion or activity. I certainly don't feel like an appeal to emotion is being made from the legions of fans who worry about the lack of continuity and I suppose the abandonment of canon. It seems to be, for the most part, a very pragmatic argument about the core foundation of good storytelling, basic cause and effect, and not having things be contradictory. However, it really wouldn't ever be a proper article shilling for new media if you didn't, very early on, attack the fans. It seems to be a very common theme that I see in a lot of these articles and videos defending the new media, particularly the new media that's bad. Because new media that's good is generally liked, so you don't have to lash out at fans because it is liked. When something is disliked, right, instead of giving the reasons why we are wrong for disliking the thing, it is an attack, it is an insult. It's labeled as toxicity or angry white males or what have you. Depends on the author. The article says, toxic fandom is a complex beast. I would agree, it is a toxic beast. Though, I would say that it's often a, tilting at windmills, I believe is the idiom. But at the root of its many convulsions, there's often one sore spot, the sticky concept of canon. So what is canon? I would say that canon is the established facts of a universe, right? Not necessarily our understanding of them, but it's the facts themselves of a universe. There's Lord of the Rings canon, there's MCU canon, there's DCEU canon, there's canon, and some canons are far easier to understand than others. For instance, it is very easy to sit down and watch The Lord of the Rings and understand what is canon in those 3 films, those 3 glorious films, that each of you, it is your duty to have watched them, the extended editions. If you haven't, just know that I'm not angry with you, I'm just disappointed. But sitting down and watching those 3 films is a fairly simple affair to know what canon is and what canon isn't. What happens in those and its effect on the next media after it are pretty easy to identify, and there's not really any problems to resolve. If there are any issues, they are typically minor to my understanding. However, if you were to sit down and watch the MCU, your understanding of that universe's canon would be absolutely... it would be pretty much impossible to truly resolve, particularly in the later stages of its existence up till now. Phase 4, in particular, the existence of Kang, the multiverse and its supposed implications, the removal of free will, it simply doesn't work. And it doesn't work in a way that you only get within fiction. And what I mean by this is that in the real world, in the reality that you and I are sharing right now, you cannot have plot holes. The universe seems to have, as a fundamental element of itself, and however deep a way you want to parse through that, but the universe seems to have these laws of logic that are simply elements of reality that cannot be taken out of reality. Laws of non-contradiction, excluded middle, identity. These are things that can't be violated in the real world, but they can be in a fictional world. So when things are constantly reframed and changed, and things are retconned, and after something's been established, it is ignored, or it is retroactive. I already said, retconned. But watching through these, it's just this tangled web of nonsense as to what is and isn't canon. The universe and the fabric of its own existence is incredibly confusing. What can characters do? What can they not do? What are the rules of this? What are the rules of that? What are the capabilities of this? What are the capabilities of that? What's the state of existence for this thing? It is a mess. And the more you think about it, the worse it gets, which is generally not something that you want to have when it comes to your canon, when it comes to your established events, the factual elements of that world. The article goes on. Canon is scripture. Canon is king. Canon can do no wrong. Its definition is simple. The term refers to a fictional body of work and its established facts. Yeah. But that's where the simplicity ends. Yeah, I suppose so. In this age of massive cultural productions, of sequels and prequels and cinematic universes, where does canon start and stop? Do novelizations, video games, or other ancillaries count? And who gets to decide? That's a good question. Let's explore briefly. Who gets to decide what canon is? It is a legitimately tough question for a lot of people. But the answer that I'm going to give is probably the one that is maybe not the most satisfying, but it's the most coherent and the one that's probably most pragmatically easy to keep track of. And that is that the canon is decided by the people who own the IP officially. When Disney purchased the rights to Star Wars from George Lucas, then Disney decided the canon of Star Wars now. They get to decide what the facts of the Star Wars universe are. As much as I might not like it, and believe me, I don't, I'd be the first person to snap my fingers and make all the sequel crap go away. You know it. I'd make Kenobi disappear. I'd make episode 7, 8, 9 disappear. I'd whisk it all away. But I don't own the IP. And headcanon exists, what we personally might consider canon for our own considerations, especially with IPs that are so fan-heavy, like Warhammer 40,000, like Star Wars, things like that. Ultimately, I understand that I don't get to set what officially happens in the world. As for the questions about novelizations, video games, and is concerned, it's whatever the IP holder decides is within canon. I guess it's that simple. Which isn't a problem necessarily, but I think it's the best answer that I could really give, and it's the one that we sort of have to work with. When new entries to the canon subvert or retcon the established universe, what's to be done with those unruly fictions? That's a good question, and I don't necessarily have an all-encompassing answer. That's sort of the problem, is that if you contradict yourself with new things that you create, well, that's bad writing. Is it creating a contradiction to the facts of the universe that you have? If you are going to establish a universe, if you're going to buy it from someone else, if you're going to create one for yourself, if you're going to commission one, whatever the case may be, then that's part of the baggage that comes along with that, and you need to respect that for sense's sake. How people resolve breaks in canon is, I suppose it's up to the individual. As for me and many of my fellows on Every Frame of Pause, my amazing podcast I run with my friends Mahler and Fringy, as for us, we tackle them one at a time, and we are not kind to them, generally. I think that's a safe generalization. After all, when storytellers dare to expand canon, okay, you're not very good at writing articles here, whether by disrupting the narrative or simply shining a flashlight into its underexplored corners, there can be hell to pay. All right, so instantly we have our first huge, I suppose, issue with this article here. Expanding canon and breaking canon are different things. If you buy, for instance, the rights to Star Wars, and you're going to make a Star Wars Episode 7 that takes place after Return of the Jedi, you're not breaking canon, right, by saying that Luke went off to do this, or Luke went off to do that, and Leia went to do this, and Han Solo went... That doesn't break canon. Adding to canon rarely breaks it. What the issue here is if you buy the rights to Star Wars, and in Episode 7, set 30 years or whatever later, after Return of the Jedi, you say, Luke was a loser who abandoned everything he loved, and cut ties with the Force, and stopped caring about everything, then that's a huge break in his character, and people are going to hate it. So while it won't necessarily break canon, right? The issue is, why are you telling this story about making Luke a loser who gave up everything that made him such an excellent character who went on such a remarkable journey? Why would you do that? I'm sure it's because you think you're a very, very clever boy. Star Wars is still not recovering from that one. The Last Jedi, boy, that was a watershed movie right there. I mean, that's what created EFAP, the podcast. That's how I got involved with it. How we all got together, really. But please, author, Adrienne, whatever your name is, do not do this. Do not do the breaking canon and expanding canon. People, we're not upset that they expand canon. We're upset that they expand canon in a really shittily written way. That's the problem. If you have a universe and you add a bunch of crap to it, people are probably not going to like it. Much like if you added crap anywhere else. If I like something, if I value something, if something has worth, if it has an admirable construction, we'll call it that, I don't want you putting poop on it. It's really simple, not difficult to understand. To the article. Increasingly, fans have become canon's militant enforcers. Calm down. Fans care about canon, so when you break it and it is incredibly important to the integrity and the continuity of a world, yeah, people who care about it are going to say something. They will speak up, or God forbid, they'll vote with their wallet. Though I'm sure all of these things you would consider toxic fandom. In fact, I imagine that you'd consider anything that isn't praise and money-giving to be a toxic bit of fandom. As if the fans' only job is to simply patronize. When those seeking to enlarge canon stray across its perceived guardrails, like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, backlash is swift and vociferous. Yeah, well, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, they made some really crap-ass movies, and they ruined a lot of the things that made Star Wars incredible. And so, yeah, the people who really like that product have a problem with that. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 were all terrible. That's the problem, is that those products were awful. The storytelling, the plot, the characters were awful garbage. And it's not my fault as a fan because I don't like it. It is your fault for making crap. In one memorable dust-up, Star Wars fans petitioned for Disney to erase The Last Jedi from the franchise's canon altogether. Yeah, goes to show how absolute crap tier... I'm trying to avoid swearing. Absolute fecal-tiered that movie was. The movie was terrible. Of course, a lot of people hated it. That was the... Helen had a face that launched 1,000 ships. And Rian Johnson had a vision that launched 1,000 YouTube careers. Somehow, canon is at once a collective orthodoxy and a personal totem, inflected with each viewer's own biases and desires, even their own bigotry too. You gotta slide that in. You gotta slide that in. Try to vilify the fans. You gotta do it. It's like there's a rule with all these people trying to defend all this terrible media. You gotta attack those fans for not liking it. Canon isn't so much a collective orthodoxy as it is just a more, I guess, orthodox orthodoxy. Whoever owns the IP sets the canon. However, a lot of people, like myself, if you ask me about Star Wars, I think about episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and some other things, but generally it's the first 6 movies. I know that in the universe, 7, 8, and 9 are canon, but my head likes to, well, forgive me for the more, I guess, childish imagery, but my mind likes to stick its fingers in its ears and go, la 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 la, I can't hear you, la 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 la, it didn't happen, no, it didn't happen, nope. And it helps me sleep better at night. And a lot of people do the same. They don't just do it with Star Wars, they do it with the MCU, the DCEU, any kinds of canon that has new things added to it by current year corporation that's written shittily. For instance, it is very easy. Fringy brings this up a lot, right? He says that it's really easy for him to just not believe that Han Solo helped to suck a space monster Cthulhu into a black hole. Like, that's just so outlandish and crazy. It's so easy for him to divorce that from Star Wars canon, even though it technically is. It's just one of those I don't believe you sorts of things. And I'm at that point now with a lot of stuff. You're going to tell me that Luke did all the things that he did in the sequel trilogy? Well, I just don't really believe you. Like, yeah, that's canon, but I just find a hard time thinking that Luke would actually do that. It's easy for me to not think about that as canon. In my own head canon, my personal preference for what isn't canon, generally a strong preference for what isn't canon, simply doesn't include those events. When I think of Luke, I do not think of Luke Skywalker from the Disney sequel trilogy, because he's crap in those. But what is actually canon, what is set by the IP owners, that is very clearly easy to understand. Well, easy to understand in the sense of what is considered canon, not whether or not it makes sense in the universe. Canon has a big problem, and the call is coming from inside the house. It's not hard to see how this obsession with canonical fealty has hamstrung Marvel and Lucasfilm, two franchise juggernauts whose every innovation is punished by a fan meltdown. Again, you're doing the thing. Adding to canon, right, is not necessarily violating canon. Don't add stuff that's bad. Don't write things terribly. When 9 out of 10 things that seem to come out these days is just terrible, that's the issue. The issue isn't that the canon was expanded by the rights holder. We expect that to happen. When Disney bought Star Wars, I mean, a lot of people were excited. Oh, those halcyon days. But a lot of people were excited. They expected for new Star Wars movies to be made, for the canon to be expanded. It would be bizarre if Disney bought it and did nothing with it. If episodes 7, 8, and 9 of the Star Wars franchise were well written, with good characters and well-executed plots, nobody would bat an eye. We would be okay with it. We would be glad that more Star Wars content was added that didn't just expand the universe, but did it in a good way. When this article, this Adrienne chick, when she talks and writes, well, I guess, talk writing, colloquially, internet, when she writes this article about how fans are just bitching that new things are added, no, you've missed the mark. That's wrong, and it is borderline dishonest of you to frame it like that. Because I know what you're doing, because you've done everything that every brainlet has tried to do in their own articles up to this point, defending the new crap. It's to conflate this concept that fans just hate anything new, as if... I don't have to explain further. I've done it enough, and you know, and I know, so why do I need to really say it? But in order to face what the actual problems fans have, that would take a lot more skill and charisma and talent. It is far more easier to set up a straw man and knock that down. It is so much more easy. Now, it's not as honest. It shows a lack of integrity or a lack of understanding. But it's so much easier. When storytellers are held hostage by their own audiences, it undermines their ability to do what artists do best. Explore, revise, play. Oh, I guess that's just... Then I guess that's it. Fuck it. Fuck Canon. To hell with it. Take that Canon and flush it down the toilet. Throw it in the garbage, because we wouldn't want to hamstring the creativity of what artists do best. Is that what you'd call, Rian Johnson? An artist doing his best when he made The Last Jedi? If you buy an IP, if you're Disney and you buy Star Wars, then you have committed to keeping within canon of Star Wars. Because you might want to have your cake and eat it too. In the sense that, we just bought this extremely popular brand name that will absolutely basically just generate money based on the virtue of its title alone. And Marvel's the same. We've purchased this set of stories and canons and continuities. Well, if you do that, then there is an expectation that you actually stick to it. That you actually kind of, dare I say, respect the thing that you bought. Marvel has a trend nowadays. There was a recent example in that She-Hulk show. What rancid, utter garbage. We talk about She-Hulk on our podcast, too, if you want to check that out. Do not watch She-Hulk. That is crap. Okay? But there's an element in She-Hulk where Daredevil gets brought in, and he has his original coloring from his original, one of his comic books, right? And he was specifically given that because fans would like that he has that comic book color scheme. And then you have the protagonist, Jen, She-Hulk, making fun of that color scheme. And they do this all the time. They want to take things and use them to generate money, but they also want to make fun of it. Oh, isn't that stupid? We want to take it, but we want to insult it. They want to have it both ways. Oh, yeah, we're going to do this thing. Fans will love that. It's a really cool reference to this comic book and whatnot that people really like. Now let's crap all over it. It's Marvel. Article. This is the problem with storytelling in the age of the mega franchise. All too often, the impulses of abiding canon conflict with the impulses of making art. Well, you know what? I guess that's just where the fucking talent comes in. If you want to make art, that's fine. Make art. But if you want to make art in Star Wars, if you want to make Star Wars art, right? If your artistry is the creation of stories within the context of the Star Wars universe, then sorry, Van Gogh, sorry, Goya, sorry, Da Vinci. You need to abide by the Star Wars canon. Star Wars as a franchise is not your thing to just fuck around with and play with like a toy in your toy box. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people who care. There's a lot of people who care about it making sense, about it being coherent, about it being well written and well constructed. If you want to take Star Wars and you want to do your own thing with it, then you have to be very careful about saying it's not canon, it didn't really happen, it's just my own little side project. You can't do this within the context of adding to the franchise. I mean, this is the Taika Waititi problem when it comes to Thor: Love and Thunder. He clearly either didn't care at all, or was just simply set out to not care, or he didn't want to care, or he thought caring was lame or something. And so that entire movie is just full of plot problems, and it destroys the character of Thor, among others. Have some fucking respect. If I got put in charge of, I don't know, Wheel of Time, or Game of Thrones, or I guess I can't say Game of Thrones now because I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but I saw House of the Dragon. It's really good and I like it. But Wheel of Time, we'll use that as an example, right? There's some book series called Wheel of Time. I know nothing about it. If I got hired to make a Wheel of Time movie or a Wheel of Time series, then, well, I have to amend the analogy. Let's say somebody made a Wheel of Time movie, and I got hired to make the second movie, a sequel to the Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time 2, Electric Boogaloo. Then what I would want to do is I would want to pour through that movie, know it back to front, virtually memorize the damn thing, so that whatever I did didn't contradict the events of the movie that mine is built upon. That just seems obvious to me. It just seems obvious to me. I mean, when you've got the writer of Multiverse of Madness, I think Michael Waldron's his name, when he wrote Multiverse of Madness, the antagonist, the villain, she's a villain, she's an evil bitch. With the villain of that movie, Wanda Maximoff, right, Scarlet Witch, he didn't watch the show about her that takes place before this movie takes place. He didn't watch it. And I'm like, dude, what the hell is wrong with you? Don't you care about understanding who your villain character is supposed to be? I should stop there. I'm getting wound up. I shouldn't get wound up. As Ron Moore, a longtime Star Trek writer who later rebooted Battlestar Galactica, put it, it's frustrating to be in the writer's room and tossing out stories and then having to stop yourself and go, does this work? Does this violate continuity? Well, yeah, I guess that can be frustrating, but it's part of your job, Ron. And I'll absolutely take it on good faith that you've made some good stories. And I can sympathize with the frustration that comes with having a really good idea, having the capacity in terms of being a writer on a show and having a big budget and the actual ability to make it a thing that's on TV and whatnot. I sympathize with you being in that position and being frustrated that your potentially good idea doesn't fit in with canon, but that's a reality of writing in a continuity is. And you should know that. And again, I can sympathize. But of course that's the case. That's where the talent of writing comes in. How do I come up with good ideas that don't violate the canon of the universe that I've been given or have some power over? If I was hired by Disney to write Star Wars Episode 10, then I would have an incredible amount of reverence for this kind of power that I've been given. I get to decide, me, Rags, the dog, I get to decide what is in a Star Wars movie, what is canon within the Star Wars universe. I consider that an honor. That's a great privilege, and I would take that extremely seriously. Does this work? Does this violate continuity? And having to call people and check encyclopedias and look up information, you want to have it all in your head and just play. The Trek universe has got to the point where you can't play anymore. I sympathize. I don't know what the official canon is of Star Trek. I couldn't go into it. I imagine it is complex. I imagine there are some breaks along the way, and I wouldn't consider those things good, but I would certainly understand if it happens, right? Though I feel here in this quote, it's almost like a pragmatic limitation on adhering to canon when there's so much information within Star Trek now. It's had so many shows, it's been running for so many years, or so many episodes. You know, I sympathize with the fact that there's so much canon in there that you could almost break it on accident. That's different than my anger at canon with other things. In fact, if you were a Star Trek writer and you accidentally broke canon and you didn't mean to, there's just so much stuff to keep in your head and you just couldn't keep it all straight, you know, I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't be upset. I would prefer it didn't happen, of course. You know, it makes it easier to accept the universe is real and to become invested in it when there's no canon breaks, but I get it. I understand. How can storytellers possibly play or progress under the weight of all that baggage and still please today's demanding audiences too? Well, as I said before, that's where what we call talent comes in. And honestly, if we talk about a franchise like Star Wars and whatnot, I mean, is there really that much canon to juggle? Because, yeah, technically, every element of canon is technically a limitation on what you can do, but the things that you can do are virtually limitless. They're practically endless. The amount of... If you are given the task of writing another Star Wars movie, and you think that in any way you feel legitimately hampered by the canon that exists, I don't know. You're just probably not a good writer. Because I can think of 1,000,001 things that I could do with a Star Wars universe and stories to tell and things to have happen that would not in any way violate canon. And if you can't, then you're just not a good writer and you lack imagination and you're just not talented at that. Maybe you're in the wrong job. Some mega franchises have found a solution where canon isn't a restriction, but rather a foundation. Yeah, that's the healthy way to view it. Yeah, that's how you should view canon. Canon is a foundation to build a story. Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to look at canon. If fans won't accept stories where canon makes less sense, then by God, these shows will bring the canon to make more sense. I'm not exactly certain what she means by that. I mean, if the canon of an IP of a franchise is a bit confusing, and you, through your incredible writing skill, find a way to make more canon that sort of ties things together in a more coherent way, then yeah, that's good. You should do that. Here we go. Over on Prime Video, Rings of Power follows a similar model. No, God, no. A similar model where J.R.R. Tolkien's source material is narratively thin, consisting largely of battles and successions. Rings of Power's showrunners have grafted connective tissue into this sparse scaffolding, shading in the thoughts, feelings, and choices that propel familiar characters to each predetermined plot point. You know what? All I can hear is insane amounts of copium with this one. Rings of Power, again, we covered all of the Rings of Power episodes on EFAP. What a disastrously bad show. What an absolute shit-tier production. Holy crap, what a mess. Every character has issues, pretty much. Very few things in that come out unscathed. If you liked Elrond from Lord of the Rings, you're going to hate him in Rings of Power. If you liked Galadriel in Lord of the Rings, you're going to hate her in Rings of Power. Oh my goodness. Ugh, if you liked what Peter Jackson created with his magnificent trilogy of Lord of the Rings movies 20 years ago, Rings of Power is going to be quite the wake-up call for you, my dude. What an absolutely miserable, miserable show. Rings of Power, how to describe it, if you're stupid, right? If you're stupid or you're not good at understanding what makes media good, if you're not good at understanding media in content, right? If you're a dumb person, then Rings of Power might seem to be good because it's written by stupid people for stupid people. But it wants to be smart. The stupid people writing it think they're smart. And a lot of the stupid people who watch it and think that it's good, they think they're smart. So it's simultaneously, you have two sides, right? You have the dumb people who think they're smart, the dumb people who think they're smart, and one is writing for the other. Save yourself time. Just watch House of the Dragon. Just watch House of the Dragon. We know where these characters are going, but if there's one thing Tolkienites understand, it's that it's the journey that shapes and changes us, not the destination. Yeah, they do understand that. I wish that the writers understood that a little bit better, so that the journey that these characters went on was a little less nonsensical and retarded. But you know what? Oh well. I can't believe Amazon spent $1 billion fucking dollars, and they just couldn't hire good writers. It legitimately it frustrates me. It legitimately frustrates me. They did all of this, and yet they couldn't get good writers. The most important thing is to have good writers, and they couldn't do that. Where Tolkien gave us only the destination, Rings of Power backfills the journey. Yeah, and what a terrible journey it is. That's the thing. That's the problem. It's such low-quality content. That's what people have a problem with. If you essentially made up a journey for Elrond, Galadriel, and company to go on, but it was really well-written and the characters were well-written, nobody would have a problem. It's like, I just want to have this sign that I can hold up that says, "It's the writing, stupid," because that seems to be the common thread with all this stuff, that the writing is bad. Take Lord Elrond, for example. How did he become such a legendary statesman, able to build consensus between mortal and immortal races? Rings of Power imagines his years as a rookie diplomat, building out a formative and often touching friendship with the dwarven prince Durin IV. Again, Elrond is a dick. And Durin, I like Durin a lot more. I feel like there's more behind Durin. The problem is that, again, the Rings of Power writers are bad at writing. They're bad at writing characters and relationships. Elrond is a manipulative asshole. He's a dick, and he's an idiot too. And so is Durin. Durin's a fool. He's a dumbass. It's like I've said before, right? It's really difficult to write clever and intelligent characters if you as a writer are not clever or intelligent. If you're not clever or intelligent, then you might have a problem writing a character to reflect those attributes if you want them to have them. As Strange New Worlds accomplishes with Spock, I don't know anything about that. Suddenly, Elrond's canonical future makes more sense. That's the article's claim. My claim, right, that I substantiate along with my friends and our amazing guests on EFAP when we talk about Rings of Power, we are in violent disagreement with this. We vehemently are against this idea that Rings of Power Elrond is going to lead to Lord of the Rings Elrond. By no means do we think that they're just different people. They're completely, entirely different people. And their journeys, as we've seen them, in no way implies that they're being led to what we understand about their characters from the Lord of the Rings. All right, to be clear, the Star Trek and Lord of the Rings fandoms are not without their own share of bad behavior, and for some fans, even simply enlarging the canon is still a bridge too far. Yeah, I'm sure some of them are like that. But again, if you expand the canon, if you took Tolkien as a foundation and you added a bunch of stuff to the Tolkien lore and it was written really well and full of awesome characters, then I highly doubt there would be much outcry. If anything, people would see this as reverence to Tolkien, that you were able to faithfully carry on in his style and in his spirit by adding these characters and these plots that were well written. And for some fans, even simply enlarging the canon is still a bridge too far. But Gandalf wasn't in Middle-earth during the Second Age, these persnickety purists argue, taking aim at the all-too-likely theory that Rings of Power's mysterious stranger is, in fact, the notorious wizard Gandalf. Yeah, those persnickety purists. Can you believe that these people who really adore Tolkien's work and his universe and his lore want you to, if you buy the rights to it, God forbid, be faithful to it? And again, as I said before, I don't think that something's faithful or unfaithful adaptation or its accuracy in adapting something has anything to do with its quality, right? I think the quality of a thing is independent of its faithfulness as an adaptation. But Tolkien is an extremely beloved and well-respected, a venerated author, and his world is, sacred in a way. So when showrunners decide to go against something that he said, then, it sets out some really bad vibes, especially when you had so much to work with, because it feels like you're just trying to bait a character that people know for clicks and views. Sure, Gandalf the Grey had yet to arrive in Middle-earth during the Second Age setting encompassed by Rings of Power, but during this timeline, he was knocking around the continent by other names and other forms. Where canon-obsessed fans might see a limitation, any good storyteller would see a tantalizing mystery. Well, I guess it all goes back to if it is well written. And Rings of Power is, unfortunately, not well written. Tolkien himself often amended and expanded his own work, so why shouldn't Rings of Power take some creative liberties, especially with the author's gray areas? Well, it's probably, right, because Tolkien was a lot more talented and passionate than the writers for Rings of Power are. So, saying Tolkien was creative, why can't we be creative? That is incredible hubris. Good luck with that. Isn't it more fun to think about what could be true rather than what must be true? Maybe. I don't know. Fun is very subjective. I'm sure there's tons of fun ideas that break canon, but you should do the fun ideas that don't break canon instead. I mean, it's a terrible attitude. Oh, just do it because it's fun. Does it contradict things? Does it ruin characters? Does it go against established events? Fuck it. It's fun, right? That's what's more important. It's fun. We just want to do things that are fun. Do not have this attitude if you are a writer. Do not say, essentially, to hell with it. We're just going to do it because it's fun. Isn't it more fun if we do it my way? Don't have this attitude. Respect your canon. What you call your fun might actually be stakeless nonsense. Getting near the end. When we love stories, we want them to make sense. Well, yeah, that's true. To have consistent internal logic, to meet the sky-high expectations that our devotion has placed upon them. Well, there's not much media nowadays that has sky-high expectations. I mean, House of the Dragon, Arcane, some things like that. Very sky-high expectations, but it's not a long list. Most of my expectations, for instance, for Rings of Power Season 2 are low expectations. The Balrog in his deep, dark pit is above where my expectations are for Rings of Power Season 2. But this first part is interesting. When we love stories, we want them to make sense. I would say those things really go hand in hand. If I watched... Here's a good example. So recently, me and my dad, we had a movie night. We watched a couple movies. Casablanca and Logan's Run. Casablanca I'd never seen before. I loved it. Excellent movie. And it's old, too. It's like 1942. It's 80 years old. That's incredible. 80-year-old movie. And I loved it. It was excellent. I really encourage everyone to see Casablanca. And we saw Logan's Run. And I think I'd seen Logan's Run as a kid. A Paparino Shibi, right? But I'd virtually forgotten everything about it. And when we watched Logan's Run, I legitimately wanted to like it. There's a cool style, and it's got this pre-Star Wars 70s sci-fi aesthetic to it. But as much as I wanted to love it, I could not. There were too many I think I'll just say it now, Logan's Run is bad. It is a bad movie, and I wanted to like it. I want to like everything, pretty much. But the characters were poorly written. The plot made little sense. There was too many issues. The relationships were really badly written. It was simply too bad, and it made too little sense, right? And that impacted my ability to love the story, okay? Let's take a counterexample to Logan's Run. Excalibur. John Boorman, the 1981 film Excalibur. Excalibur is a very flawed film. It's got a fair number of issues in it. But I love that movie. I love it because there's enough good things in it. There's enough good quotes and enough decent characters. There's some really interesting themes and the way that the music is done, and some of the imagery is really excellent. Some great acting. A nightmare to others. It's just, man. So good. I love Excalibur. I need to get that's what I'll do soon. I need to get a big-ass poster of Excalibur, because I love that movie. Warts and all. And where Logan's Run and Excalibur both have problems, one is far more redeemable, I feel, than the other. Now let's talk about Casablanca, right? The 1942 classic Casablanca. Or maybe it's 43, right? That movie makes a lot of sense. What characters do make a lot of sense. The progression of events makes a lot of sense, right? And so it's very easy for me to take elements that I like, the music, the characters, the dialogue, the writing, just the sets, the things that I fall in love with on a more visceral level. When those foundations of good writing and making sense, when those are the foundations that those other things are built upon, that's where the love happens. That's where I know the love is true. It's well deserved. Seriously, if you haven't seen Casablanca, you should see it. It's really great. One thing I noticed when I was watching Casablanca was there's a lot of famous lines from that movie, and even if you haven't seen the movie before, when they say those lines, you sort of you're like, oh, that's where it came from. That's kind of neat. If you guys watch Casablanca, it'll be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, I promise you. Back to the article. I'm reminiscing about far better things than Rings of Power and Star Wars. But canon isn't purely good by definition. And I guess it's true. It's neutral. I mean, it's canon should be adhered to. I guess being pure, it depends on how you mean it, but you should adhere to canon. And sometimes it restricts good it restricts good storytelling. I suppose if you want to tell a good story, except that good story has a bunch of canon breaks in it, well, then I guess that's not much of a good story, is it? If you have to say, it's a good story if you ignore the canon breaks, then how good of a story was it really? If you have to break the established facts of that universe in order to tell a good story, first off, I don't know how talented you are as a writer, but yes, canon can be viewed in two ways. It can be viewed as a restriction on what you can do, or it can be viewed as a solid foundation upon which to build your own work. Whichever one you see it as, well, that's on you. For a story to endure and expand decade after decade, decade after decade is 20 years. In 20 years, Lord of the Rings came out. And the Lord of the Rings adheres to its canon, right? As its own franchise, at least. That was a very well-written trilogy. And indeed, if you have very well-written movies that have excellent climatic moments and dramatic moments and great cast of characters and incredible music and imagery. Oh, I love Lord of the Rings. I think The Fellowship of the Ring is my favorite movie ever. But The Lord of the Rings has lasted decade after decade. It literally has. People still adore those movies and people still know those movies. Rings of Power. Who's talking about Rings of Power, really? Is anyone talking about Rings of Power? People are talking about House of the Dragon. People are talking about other things that come out. People aren't going to be talking about Rings of Power. And all those shitty Phase 4 Marvel movies, no one's going to be talking about those. No one cares about Multiverse of Madness anymore. No one cares about Love and Thunder anymore. No one cares about those shows. And She-Hulk and all that. It's smoke in the wind. It's barely there for a moment, and then it just off it goes, indistinguishable from everything else around it. But the Lord of the Rings, it's like a rock, it's like a mountain set into the earth, and it will be remembered forever because of its quality. And the Rings of Power is just, it's drifted away, and no one will remember it, except maybe in passing parlance when someone says, hey, remember that crappy-ass fantasy show? And decade after decade, as all of these mega franchises have, they're not going to. And a lot of them haven't. A lot of movies have just faded into obscurity. It must be adaptive and reactive. I don't necessarily agree at all. I don't think for something to last, it has to be adaptive and reactive, right? I think that it has to fasten itself to its canon, and it has to be well written, and it has to be memorable in ways that people can, well, for lack of a better word, remember. Whether it's Game of Thrones, at least when it started off, having memorable characters and excellent plots, or, I mean, that seems to be a common thread with all these things that are remembered. But we talk about Casablanca, that's an 80-year-old movie, and it holds up. It is good. You can watch it now, again, 80 years later, and it's still a banger of a film, because it has a good plot with excellent characters, good writing, great acting. We were just talking about Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson trilogy. Excellent music, great visuals, excellent characters, and incredible just writing throughout. It has messages that persist onwards. I mean, again, Casablanca and Lord of the Rings and all the stuff that's great that we remember. It often has messages that are universal and timeless. As Tolkien himself said of his own legendarium, it must leave room for other minds and hands. Yeah, but we want those minds and hands to be good. Isn't it exciting to consider that we still don't know everything about these characters and their worlds all this time later? Well, you know what? If you asked me that earlier, years ago, I would have said, yeah, it's really exciting we don't know that. And now I think, oh God, these shit tier companies with their shit tier writers, they're going to hire these horribly untalented people, and they're going to ruin all the stuff that we don't know. They're going to try and squeeze in all their crap into all the little crevices that they can, and they're going to ruin it. I'm just so wary and worried every time I hear that this is going to get remade. They're going to make a new season of this. We're going to do this, do that. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be terrible, won't it? Just leave it alone. Now I just want them to leave things alone. Just make your own stuff. Quit taking other things that I like and ruining them. These fictional sandboxes are endlessly generative. It's part of why we can't get enough of them. I mean, speak for yourself. I've got all the rings of power that I ever needed and then some. Let's wrap this up. Let's finish this together. All right. In the age of corporatized canon, perhaps wanting these storytellers to tear up the rulebook is too much to ask. Yeah, I don't want them to tear up the rulebook. I want you to be talented writers and work within the canon of the world you've been given, and maybe treat it with a bit of respect. But as radical as this yes and approach to canon may seem, it's really just a shade of what's possible. When I watch crap like everything in the MCU and Rings of Power, the last thing I want to think about is, oh, it's just a shade of what's possible. Like, don't make me think about the fact that you could keep going and it could be even worse. Ron Moore offers a compelling roadmap for what it might look like to no longer be straitjacketed by canon. I'm sorry, that's how you feel about it. I mean, you're the one who voluntarily took the job to be a Star Trek writer, just to be clear. This was version 1 of Trek. Love it. Celebrate it. Watch it forever if that's your cup of tea. Go ahead. Let's have version 2. Let's have another Starship Enterprise with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And let's tell a different version of the events. Look, well, you can do that, by the way. You can say that, I mean, that's essentially what they did with the J.J. Abrams Trek. It was like its own side universe, side thing. If you specifically decide to use like Star Trek or Star Wars, and then you explain explicitly, this takes place in the Star Wars universe, but it's a different line of canon. It's a different universe. It's a different sort of continuity. It's a redo of the story. It's a remake, not a remaster. Then that's its own thing. But you can't make sequels to stuff, right? That's based off of a foundation of canon and then deny that canon. That's different. How many versions of Cleopatra can the world stand? Look at Shakespeare, right? How as many as you can think of. Let's just do a different take on it and get energy out of it and not worry about all the backstories. You want Trek to be fun, so make it fun. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily want Star Trek to be fun. Maybe I think Star Trek should probably be scary at times. Sometimes it should be pensive and thought-provoking. Sometimes even a little sad and depressing. Sometimes it should be fun, absolutely. But again, just because... If you want to make something fun, I mean, that's good and all, but your vision of what you should make, what should be made, doesn't necessarily fit in with the world that you've been given. Now, a lot of the times it does. And again, part of the writing talent is to adhere to the canon and the reality of the universe you're writing in and make compelling and good stories. All right, let's wrap this up. When it comes to canon, it's true what they say. If you love something, set it free. Well, you know, I don't think that destroying canon and writing bad stories is setting something free. If anything, I think you're destroying it. I think that you are lessening its quality. You're smearing it in feces. I don't think you're setting it free. And when it comes to media, whether something is free or restricted, I mean, it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, it's a nice sentimental thing to say, and I'm sure that when you wrote this to end your article, it felt very, very meaningful and deep and passionate. But it's a worthless thing to say, really. If someone was to, for instance, be given the rights to make a sequel trilogy to the sequel trilogy, or if someone was to make another Lord of the Rings movie that took place after Return of the King, I would never say well, if you love this story, I want you to set it free. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. I'd say, this is Fellowship of the Ring. This is the Two Towers. This is the Return of the King. Watch these. Commit them to memory. Know every goddamn line. This is your holy book. This is your Bible. This is your sacred scripture. This is your Pope, your Imam, your Grand Prophet. This is your God. And you need to respect this. People love this. They adore it. It is a classic story that is timeless. I'm not hiring you to set this story free. Show this world, this IP, this franchise, this universe, this man. You show him some goddamn respect, or I am firing you. That's what I'd say. Or you could say, well, if you love the story, you set it free. Isn't that more fun? Well, that was a fun little read. Got some good little discussions out of that. I hope you enjoyed. Right at the hour mark. Excellent. I really like that. If you guys would like more, I of course have all the other videos here in the Dogbytes channel, and I have my main channel, Rags, that you might enjoy. And of course, as I've mentioned, I run a very cool podcast called Every Frame a Pause with my friends, Mahler and Fringy, and we have excellent guests, and we talk about movies and shows and all kinds of stuff. We have a great time. I'd love to see you guys over there. We stream on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Central, and sometimes the same time on Wednesdays, where we try to do catch-ups and whatnot. And of course, if you like my work, you can support me on Patreon and Subscribestar. The links are in the description below. And I'll plug it again. I've got an amazing plushie from Makeship. It's been selling well, and I really hope that you guys give it a look, because it helps me out immensely if you buy one of those. So, you guys have an excellent day, and remember, please, respect canon, respect stories. I do think they're important to culture, and they help us grow. They help us to learn about ourselves and the things around us, and how to behave and how to be good. Don't devalue them by not treating them with respect. Bye-bye now. Toodaloo. See you later.